Almost chickened out on you.
Okay, we thought what we'll do today is give an introduction on how and why we wrote this book together. And then Eddie will read passages from his book, our book, and then we'll be glad to answer questions. So let me start by saying that I first met Eddie in 2002 while I was doing research for this book called Chinese American Voices from the Gold Rush to the Present. And I needed a World War II story told by a Chinese American. And the late Colonel Bill Strobridge, who was a military historian, was kind enough to introduce me to Eddie. He told me that Eddie had the distinction of being the only Chinese American to be captured by the Japanese in World War II. And he was put to work on this Burma Siam death railroad that was made famous by the film Bridge over the River Kwai. And since I had never seen the film, I ran out to get it and looked at the film before I interviewed Eddie. And I must say I was horrified by the brutal treatment of the prisoners under the Japanese. But I was also impressed by the courage and heroic actions of the POWs in this film. And I hoped that Eddie would be forthcoming with details about how he as a Chinese American fared under similar circumstances. So in my first interview with Eddie, it took about 5 hours and I barely scratched the surface of his interesting life. He proved to be a very natural storyteller with a fantastic memory for details, a precise way of expressing himself, a wonderful sense of humor, and a strong determination to tell his story right. So in essence, he is every oral historian's dream come true. Very easy to interview. And after I finished this 10-page story for Chinese American Voices, I felt very strongly that his entire life story deserved to be published in a book. But Eddie didn't think so. He said that he didn't have any unique experiences. No one would be interested in reading about his story. And he also said, I can't write. And so I convinced him to let me continue interviewing him. And I said the least we could do is record the story and transcribe the interviews and put it into an archive for other researchers. And so he agreed to let me interview him on weekends or whenever I was in San Francisco, because I was living in Santa Cruz at the time. So 50 more hours of interviews later, and right in the middle of an interview, he proposed. And this is not supposed to happen when you're interviewing people in a professional relationship. But we gave in to Cupid's arrow, and we got married on April Fool's Day, 2003. And we deliberately picked this day because we didn't think our friends and family would believe that we were getting married. And then I quit my job at the university, and I went on to finish the book. And so what I did was I completed another 25 hours of interviews, and I transcribed all 75 hours, and it amounted to about 1,000 pages of text. And then I did what's called cut and paste, and that is to edit, to rearrange selections, and whittle down this 1,000-page document into 200 pages. But I made sure that the entire story was told in Eddie's own words, so I didn't change anything that he said or rewrote anything that he said. So this book, The Adventures of Eddie Fung, is very much a collaborative life history project, as well as a labor of love. And it's our answer to friends and family who've always wanted to know more about Eddie's life and why I married him, but were afraid to ask. And for everyone else, I think you will enjoy reading about Eddie's adventures, and in the process, learn about what it means to be a Chinese American, a Texan cowboy, a POW survivor, and a mensch. A man. So let's begin at the beginning. Eddie was born in San Francisco, Chinatown in 1922. He grew up during the time of Chinese exclusion, when Chinese immigrants were not allowed to come to this country. His father came across the Canadian border illegally sometime in the 1890s and worked as a jeweler and a watchmaker in Chinatown. His mother came in 1914 and sewed at home while raising a family of 6 children. So Eddie, tell us about your family and your paper brothers.
I had 2 older adopted brothers who were born in China, and 4 older sisters, and a younger brother who were born at home, like me. The reason we had 2 adopted brothers was because after my parents got married in China, and before Pop came over to America, it was thought that Mom was barren. So since he was leaving China to find his fortune in the West, he decided to adopt 2 sons to keep her company. When he finally got Mom over here in 1914, 1 year later, my oldest sister was born. And how did Pop get his wife and 2 sons over here when he was illegal? He had a brother in San Francisco who had a wife and 3 sons in China. As a merchant, he could have brought them to America, but he never intended to do so. Instead, he sold the papers to my father. Mom came over legally as my uncle's wife. My oldest brother, adopted brother, Al, came over as my uncle's 10-year-old son. And his name was Ho Lai Guang. Somehow, Pop knew the Chinese Consul General, and in 1939, the Consul General fixed it so that Mom and Uncle were divorced. And then Mom and Dad got married. Of course, all the kids were in attendance. And in 1920, Pop bought papers for my second adopted brother, Francis, or Pee-wee as we called him. And he came over as a 9-year-old son of a native-born citizen. Both Pee-wee and Al kept their paper names because it would get too complicated. The Consul General could only do so much. This would create all kinds of problems later, like when I went overseas in November of '41. And my mother said, if you stop in